Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, should governments be allowed to reach into your pockets during an economic crisis? We examine how Cypriots are coping with losing their life savings. As always, Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. So, Malika, we all think of our banks as a safe place to store our money. But we've been asking our community, should our savings be part of sharing the burden in an economic crisis like what's going on in Cyprus? And what do they say?
Well, probably not surprisingly, they say no way.
Yeah.
That the bank should get its
surprising.
hands out of their pockets. But what's been interesting in what I've been seeing and going through this is that people are saying Twitter has been the best source of information on finding out everything about this crisis. And Alex tweets, "The crisis has brought Twitter in Cyprus to the mainstream. There's no going back now. Twitter is now a major media source in Cyprus." So for those of you at home, we want you to use Twitter to send us your thoughts on that, whether you're in Cyprus or elsewhere. Share your comments and questions with hashtag AJStream.
Now, with us today to discuss the crisis in Cyprus is Alexander Apostolidis. He is joining us from Nicosia, where he is a lecturer in economic history at the European University. Alex, we are thrilled to have you with us. I'd also like to welcome a number of Cypriots in our Google Plus Hangout. They'll be sharing their personal thoughts and ideas about the financial crisis. Of course, these Hangouts are for you as well, so if you'd like to be in one, just make sure you visit the link below and add us to your circles.
Hi, I'm Wais Islam. I'm a former Labour councillor and Olympic ambassador, and I'm in the stream.
Another financial crisis in the European Union and yet another massive bailout. This time, it's the small island of Cyprus, which has become the fifth European nation to need saving. 10 billion euros from the EU and IMF have been given to Cyprus to prop up their banking system. But this deal's different. For the first time, EU regulators are using funds from depositors at Cypriot banks, meaning taking money right out of people's personal savings accounts. Uninsured accounts of more than 100,000 euros are subject to this taxation, and in some cases, these accounts could lose as much as 60%. Some estimates go as high as even 80%. This is a major departure from previous bailouts. Reaction to those deals, which did not include cuts to individual people's earnings, were still met with public outrage. In countries like Greece and Spain and Portugal, there were riots and clashes with the police. Yet, despite the cuts and the strict capital controls so far, Cypriots have been calm. So much so that the president thanked citizens in a tweet for their maturity and collectedness shown in their interaction with the Cypriot banks. So, as Cypriots cooperate, we examine the human cost of the bailout and ask, what does the future hold for Cyprus and its citizens? And will the banking system recover and regain people's trust? To help us answer some of these questions, we're also joined via Skype from Nicosia by Fiona Mullen. She is the director of Sapienta Economics, a consultancy group based in Cyprus. Fiona, welcome to the stream.
Hello, good morning.
You know, it's important to note that we reached out to the former governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus, who oversaw the country's transition to the euro. He declined our invitation. We also reached out to the Bank of Cyprus and Lakia Bank for statements and received no response. Alex, I would like to begin with you. You know, we've never really seen anything like what's happening in Cyprus. EU regulators freezing individual assets and then taking money directly out of people's bank accounts to offset debt. Why rewrite the rules now with Cyprus?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying Twitter also had an indirect effect in the negotiations. I can confirm that many more people than you think were watching these Twitter interactions between economists and other commentators. Now, from then on, the idea was a combination that we have Cyprus is a crisis of having too much. We had too much government debt and needs for government repayment of this debt. We had too much banking expansion, too much euro solidarity because we allowed our banks to get a huge hit when we accepted Greece to reduce its debt on private creditors, and too much delay. We delayed so much that we're so close to the German elections whereby a harder line was demanded by German voters, or at least German voters of the main parties.
So but a lot of countries within the Eurozone have made similar, and I want to explain to our viewers too, we've got quite a delay between Alex and me, so we're not actually intentionally talking over the top of each other. But Alex, we've got a precedent, a history rather, within the Eurozone of 4 other countries that received bailouts that didn't have this kind of a bailout, where there was the asset freeze and the government literally coming in, or the regulators literally coming in and taking people's personal savings. Why go this route now?
Well, it's very, very clear that what happened is that the south is still weak. The south of Europe, the south of the Eurozone is still weak. At the same time, the north is getting fed up. At least the constituents. I mean, it's a democracy. The democratic constituents of the north are getting fed up, which what they see is they would see it as handouts that actually do not solve the crisis. And let's not underestimate the ability of the Eurozone to turn crisis into a farce, because we applied for that bailout in order to save our banking sector, and by the whole mess, which I have to say Cyprus has a lot to blame as well for creating, we ended up having the bailout but actually destroying our banking sector. So really, Eurozone seems to be not governed by economics but the politics, and the politics seem to pull the euro apart in a way that make even manageable crisis. Let's not forget, ours is a periphery, very small sum compared to the other bailouts. So even small crisis can turn into a real disaster for Europe when the politics get involved.
Fiona, maybe a small sum, but a very big and chilling effect in terms of the type of precedent that this sets. Is this what the future of bailouts looks like?
Well, it seems so if you believe the Dutch finance minister, Mr. Dijsselbloem. He was rapidly had to sort of, but not quite, retract what he said a few days ago when he pretty much said this is the model for the future, that we're not just going to bail out, we're not just going to use European taxpayers' money to bail out either banks or governments. There has to be participation of the people. He called them creditors of the banks, and this is, I think, what has frightened people a little, because when you put your money in the bank, you don't think of yourself as a creditor to the bank, but in fact, in terms of accounts, that's what you are. You're a liability to the bank when you put your money in a deposit. So I think it's bound to be. You know, everyone says Cyprus is unique, and there were reasons why there were. You know, you couldn't go and hit the other usual suspects, the sovereign debt holders and the bank debt holders, because it just wasn't big enough. But I think, imagine when you get to Italy, it's got a very big banking system too. There's no way the German taxpayers is going to agree to bail out Italy without some hit on absolutely everybody in Italy too. I think it's inevitable.
And it's that feeling of being a liability that you just mentioned, Fiona, that people online are echoing. There's anger. It's measured, but there is anger. V tweets, just because the government mismanaged money doesn't mean we need to give ours to make it better. Another tweet from Mario who says, this bailout is phony. People in Cyprus were manipulated. They are now stuck in it. Well, Michael, in our Google Plus Hangout, I want to go to you because you're best posed to tell us what's happening on the ground. You know, we see these angry tweets, but on the whole, relatively, the protests and the reaction has been measured. Would you agree?
I would agree that yes, it's been measured, but I think that's tempered by the kind of the early situation we're in. I mean, this crisis has just started to manifest itself. So this calmness that we're experiencing right now, relative calmness, could spill over in the future. I think that what you're noticing right now is that Cypriots are still dealing with the shock. You know, this is how it's being described, and this is how it started on the 15th of March when this was announced. That it was on the 16th. Excuse me. It was shock at the notice that people would have their bank accounts raided, and I think that people are still suffering from the shock. But I also put this relative response, this moderate response, down to the fact that Cypriots recognize that they need to be tempered. They need to be assured. They need to respond in a fairly measured way, because I think this is the only way this society has learned to cope with the past traumas. I mean, we could go back to the history of the Republic of Cyprus, which is a very, very short history, starting in 1960. And since 1974, as a fairly new state, it's had to deal with a number of crises, and 74 was probably the major crisis. So I think people have learnt to deal with crisis in a fairly measured way. And I think this partly explains why people are at the moment taking it on the chin and just trying to look at how they can get through the next day, because these capital controls are strangling the market.
You know, Alex, Michael just brought up the issue of this timeline and how people have really been walking around in shock because it just came out of left field. Can you talk about these accusations that there are some powerful business leaders and powerful politicians that may have been given a heads up, a tip-off, that these capital controls were going to come into place, and maybe through a tip-off, that's why hundreds of millions of euros were actually funneled out of the country right before the restrictions were put in?
Well, first of all, you mentioned something, and we have to be clear to people. This is not just saving accounts. It's any account, current account, business account. It involves hospitals, universities, retirement homes, pension funds, right? So Michalis is right that we're still in shock because we haven't realized how many companies, hospitals, firms, and other issues that were doing well will now close because they don't have any working capital, right? As for these things, let's be clear. It was pretty clear for anyone who understood the most basic business economics that if you had more than 100,000 in either like eBank or Bank of Cyprus, you would probably move it somewhere else. Why? Because there were hints. There were quite a lot of hints. The New York Times wrote about this over a month before it happened, that this deposit haircut, as it's called, where you swap people's money for shares of banks that are in trouble, was going to happen. So maybe some people were tipped off, but at the same time, let's not underestimate that quite a lot of people saw this coming from a long way away. So there is a commission that was set up by the president who's going to try and find what happened in defaults. I'm sure this is one of the issues they're going to tackle, and I think this is the hardest. I think a lot of people saw it coming. So maybe, yes, there were people tipped, and if that's the case, we should investigate. But I think at the same time, let's be clear, the writing was on the wall for anyone who knew where to look.
So, Fiona, you know, we've been talking about a lot of big picture issues here. Get us down to the nitty gritty. How much is this going to cost the average Cypriot? What does this mean to a small local business owner? I mean, a lot of these small businesses are what keep these smaller economies chugging along.
Yes, I mean, the economy of Cyprus, you know, if you look at the international media, you'd think that all it is swashbuckling financiers. In fact, it's 92% of businesses have less than 10 employees. So it's not even a small business economy, it's a micro business economy. And everybody now wants cash for supplies. So I have a friend in Larnaca, he sells electronic items, and he can't sell them unless he pays cash up. He can't get the supplies in unless he pays cash up front. So he's stuck because he doesn't have the cash. I've got around 5,000 in bills I need to pay to my suppliers, and I'm unable to pay them online. I have to queue up at the bank, hope that they believe my invoice is genuine, and then I can pay the bill. So there's a real cash crunch in the economy now, and a lot of people. I think what Michael said earlier is true. We still don't know yet what the side effects are going to be, so they're pretty serious. But I also agree with what Alex said earlier. You know, up until the 15th of March, it was perfectly legal to take your money out of Cyprus, and the New York Times started in January. The Financial Times followed in February. So anybody who was economically literate knew you had to get your money out of Cyprus, and that's what I was telling everybody too, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, more responses here online. Isabel says, since ordinary people had nothing to do with the crisis that originated within the overly ambitious financial system, then no, people in Cyprus should not have to share the burden. And a Facebook comment from Peter Yang, who says, if I woke up one day to find out that the government unilaterally took a percentage of my funds, of my account, being angry would be an understatement. So George, in our Google Plus Hangout, I want to go to you. You're a blogger in Cyprus. Sorry, not in our Hangout. You're on the phone. You're a blogger in Cyprus. Who do you blame?
I'm actually blaming firstly the Eurogroup ministers of finance that actually gave an ultimatum of 3 days, a bad plan where the money of the people were actually confiscated. If it's already taxed money, then it's a confiscation. So, of course, I'm blaming the Cypriot government, but firstly and foremost, I'm blaming the Eurozone leaders for making Cyprus a guinea pig case, basically, and also engaging Cyprus in the German election campaign. Yeah.
Nikos Zavalis, I want to go to you in our Google Plus Hangout. You know, this is a pretty depressing subject matter. The people in Cyprus struggling right now. Their banks were shut down for 2 weeks. Their assets were frozen. Amid all of this, with people waiting in soup lines, not knowing how they were going to get their bills paid, something rather extraordinary happened. Tell us about the concert that you were part of.
It was a group of artists. We started talking to each other, and we decided to go ahead putting up a music concert to give courage to the people, for one, unite, produce something that would actually, we didn't know the outcome, but the whole aim of it, the whole outcome would be to collect food and basic needs for people that are in need or will be in need soon enough. That was the whole point of it.
Well, I'd like to go to Elena now in our Hangout, because Elena, you're part of a project that's collecting voices of Cypriots, wanting to know what they feel about this. What have you been hearing?
Well, I would say that there are quite a few opinions. Of course, there's many people that are scared, people that are anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow. At the same time, there are a few people, especially youth, seems to be quite optimistic about let's work hard, let's see what we can do, think creatively, and find a quite effective solution to make things quite good for the youth, because we're going to be here tomorrow, the next 10 years, the next 20 years. We've actually had some really nice responses saying that Cypriots will have to now remember that consumer culture, for example, is not the only culture. That was a quite nice quote from one of our contributors. So I would say that there is some positivity. People are trying to be optimistic about things and try to think creatively. The same way with Cyprus Aid, it's something quite beautiful and humanitarian. So I would say, although people are scared and worried, they are trying to think of what can they do to make things better.
Fiona, I want to get back to something that you said earlier, was this fear that people are realizing now that they're being considered creditors to the banks. One, does this have the potential to undermine the entire banking system in Europe? And two, what is the incentive for Europeans to keep their money institutionalized at this point?
Yeah, I think if you're a European depositor now, a Eurozone depositor, and you've got more than 100,000 in the accounts, you're going to start reducing that. You're going to spread your risk. If you keep your money in the Eurozone at all, you're going to spread your risk among lots of different banks. So in the end, I think we may end up with more banks as a result of this, but with smaller economies of scale. So more banks with smaller economies of scale making less profit, being less well capitalized, because nobody wants to have more than 100,000 in the accounts. And let's not forget that the limits used to be 20,000, and who knows whether people might bring it back down below 100,000 in order to make sure even more voters pay for voting in bad governments. So I think it's, everybody's saying, look, the markets haven't reacted too much. Cyprus isn't therefore a contagion risk. But I think the longer term, we'll see over the longer term how this works out. People are going to start. I mean, I've already got clients paying me into a UK account instead of into Cyprus, and I feel bad as an economist. I know this isn't doing the economy any good, but as a person who needs to survive, I'm accepting to get them paid in the UK instead of Cyprus.
Michael, Elena mentioned that she felt some positivity on the young person front throughout this crisis. Do you think that the younger generation is okay with bearing part of this burden financially?
Well, I think Nico didn't do himself justice there just then when he spoke about the Cyprus Aid concert. Really, I mean, the impression it left on the wider population was really one of great optimism, of a spirit that we haven't seen in Cyprus for a very long time, of inclusiveness, of coming together to support people in difficult times. And it's something that usually comes out in crisis periods. And I hate to use the analogy that people need a crisis to come together, but I mean, this could really pull us out of a lethargy, of an apathy that we've been going through for a very long time, which I would put down to a deference in certain leaderships, in certain politics that haven't taken this country forward in the last few years. So in addition to the great Cyprus Aid concert that Nico spoke about, we should also mention that there are now clinics being set up in major urban areas, in Nicosia, in Limassol, in Paphos, in Larnaca, that are being set up by the doctors of the world every Saturday, so that people who are in need can go and receive that treatment. And I've been speaking to people a lot over the last couple of days, and people who are generally going to lose a fair bit of money, deposited over 100,000 euros, and they're saying that the primary concern right now is to stabilize the people who are likely to lose more than they are. So I think, at least from my point of view, especially in the last few days when the situation seems to be calming down and people are starting to realize the after effects, there seems to be a fair bit of positivity. And I think this is the messages we need to be getting out there to the international media who've, in these kind of instances, and I'll use Al Jazeera as an exception, are trying to perhaps pull together the kind of news stories that will sell.
Well, thank you for that. And you mentioned that they're losing money, but they're also giving money. I want to go very briefly to Nico, just so you can elaborate on that. What came out of the concert?
What we received, backstage at least, was the immense love of the people. It was unbelievable. You could see the crowd gathering up from 12 midday, and they were there, sitting there quietly, patiently, loving each other until almost midnight when we're done. Watching some pictures yesterday at the news, it was amazing to see the human chains that were being formed to carry out all the foodstuff that was being gathered. At some point, the army was called in because we couldn't handle it anymore. And as producers, we never expected this outcome.
So a spirit of solidarity.
Oh, totally. And the best of it was, sorry.
All right, I'm gonna have to put a pause on you right there, but we're gonna pick this conversation up in our online post show because we're out of time in the main program. But before we go, we do have Malika with just a couple other stories we're following.
Venezuela's interim president has tweeted his way to the top of the online trending charts, literally. Across South America, the web was abuzz with the word pajarito, which means little bird in Spanish, after Nicolas Maduro used the term in a speech captured by state television. At an opening rally of his campaign, Maduro said he felt the spirit of late President Hugo Chavez return in the form of a bird that whistled to him while he was in prayer, giving Maduro its blessing. His confession sparked a mix of disbelief and sarcasm online. Willie tweets, "First I thought, well, Maduro is praying, that never hurts, but the reincarnation of Chavez that speaks by whistling to him? What?" And Juan Pablo shared this cartoon illustrating Maduro and a bird. Maduro asks, "Is that you? If it is, send me a sign." Next up, the Associated Press has tweeted that it dropped the word illegal immigrant from its style book, a writing reference guide widely used by journalists. The news agency reasons that the term illegal should describe only an action, such as living in or immigrating to a country illegally. Several applauded the AP in tweets like these, saying, "Good move," or "I love this." But others bristled at what they viewed as the AP's attempt to be politically correct, suggesting their own snarky changes using hashtag #NewAPStyle. Voter fraud is now voter assistance. Gay marriage opponents are now pre-evolved Americans, and drug addict is out. Please use person who consumes a more than optimal quantity of narcotics. Well, those are a few of the stories on our radar, so share yours with us. Use the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, go to your computer, log on to stream.aljazeera.com, and join us for the rest of this discussion on Cyprus. Hope to see you online. Welcome back to the Online Post Show. We're talking about Cyprus and the economic crisis there and this new twist on a bailout that's occurred, which is where the EU and the IMF regulators have gone into the bank accounts of Cypriot citizens, put on a freeze, and then literally taken money out of these individual accounts to offset the debt. So that's the basis for our discussion today. Fiona, I want to pick it up with you. Do you think that Cyprus perhaps should have just abandoned the euro?
It's a question that a lot of people are asking now, and the voices are rather louder than they were even a week ago. That there are some technical problems about leaving the euro. We don't have enough what are called foreign reserves to defend the currency. So if we did fall out of the euro, you'd pretty much find that nobody could pay for imports within the space of about 2 weeks. So we're not in such a great position to do that. But there are some people saying, is there any such thing as a planned or an orderly exit from the euro? But right now, I mean, I did a little bit of analysis for a local paper this morning, and it's not an absolute. Well, put it this way: the arguments are generally in favour, but only just. It's not as bigger gap as you'd think.
The arguments are in favor of leaving the euro by the average Cypriot?
Staying in the euro. Yeah.
Staying in the euro.
But more really because of the geopolitics. You know, Cyprus might be in the European Union, but geographically it's actually in the Middle East. And we've got Turkey to the north with troops on this island. We've got Israel. We've got, Lebanon is a 20-minute ride away. And because of the geopolitics, if Cyprus left the euro, it would probably have to leave the European Union. And for Cyprus, the European Union has been very much its security umbrella against potential Turkish moves. So I think that will probably win the day. And hopefully, going back to what some of the others were saying earlier, everybody knows that when you're in an EU bailout program, it's a lot of austerity. But I think Cypriots and because of the things that have been happening, this aid concerts, the kinds of initiatives that's taking place, Cyprus has a very, very highly qualified workforce. I think it's the highest tertiary education rates in the EU, so they've got the most university graduates in the EU. And these young people have got ideas, they want to do things, and I think then they will no longer tolerate the politicians sitting back and pretending there's nothing wrong. So that gives me hope that maybe we might be better off than Greece in a couple of years' time.
Alex, I want to bounce over to you. I was actually reading that 67% of Cypriots at some point in the last week or so said they would rather leave the euro and tighten relations with Russia. Do you believe that to be true? And if so, what does that say in terms of a broader statement about democracy, really?
Well, I think people were in such shock they didn't understand what was happening. We approached Russia and Russia said, niet. They said no. I have to say I have an open PowerPoint for people to show why I strongly believe that, which I actually have on Twitter, which I strongly believe that we shouldn't leave the euro. And the real reason is the oil shock. People feel, let's be clear, people feel the damage to their pride. They felt they did their European duty by not saying no to the Greek bailout, and they looked around for friends when the Eurogroup was happening and they saw none. So I think it's natural to look for another friend and maybe look for Russia, but Russia clearly also didn't want to help more than it already did by giving us a loan of 2.5 billion farther back, which the previous government completely wasted rather than give to help the banks. So I understand. Don't also forget that we have the same religion with Russia, and there's quite a lot of people here who speak Russian who either their whole family or part of their family actually migrated from areas of the Soviet Union while the Soviet Union was falling apart. So really there's a strong desire for a closer union with Russia, but Russia wants us, in an arm's way. In the end, they prefer to have a good relationships with Germany, who receives most of their gas at inflated prices, rather than Cyprus. May I just shout out and say, for the organizers of Cyprus Aid, that was brilliant, but let's now find ways of helping the youth. And I think let's do Cyprus Aid too, where we establish a microfinance for for young entrepreneurs. It's true what Fiona said. We have a lot of young people here. They need, they have the knowledge. What they need is credit. We've been asked to destroy our banking system, so they're going to need loans. So let's figure out how to use this momentum to give them what they need to start their business. That would be fantastic.
Nice shout out.
And I'd also like our community to let us know what they think of that idea of microfinancing and whether or not that would work. But George, I want to go to you because earlier I asked you who you blamed and you said the EU. There's a Facebook comment here from Dris Ben. He says, is this fair? Well, is it fair that Germany should have to subsidize the rest of the EU? No, it's not. However, this is what you signed up for when you agreed to the EU in the first place. Do you think his comments are fair?
I don't think that Germany is actually subsidizing the EU at the moment, because the money that go out of Cyprus, the investment that is going out of Cyprus at the moment, because one of the two productive sectors was literally destroyed overnight, is going to go to other EU countries. And the EU Ministers of Finance know that. So the money going out of Cyprus now is going to other Cypriot, to other European countries. So no, I don't think that Germany is actually paying for Cyprus. But at the moment, Cyprus is actually a victim of Germany's election period, of Merkel's attempt to show strength within the EU partners.
Michael, I want to get back to you. We've got about a minute left in the program. Give us a sense from things on the ground there. Do you think it's going to get better, or are people still anticipating this getting worse?
I think that this initial shock and readjustment period will take time to show its true colors as to whether we will have the kind of protests, and I don't think we'll get to the level of street violence we had in Greece. I think there's a tendency to draw comparisons between Greece and Cyprus simply because of the proximity of language, of history, but I don't think that this is the case. I think there is a different political culture here. There is a more kind of a greater maturity to a certain extent. I'm not saying in a holistic statement, but I think yes, things. I think that things may get a little bit more strained. Relations between the employers and employees, I think, will certainly suffer, and a lot will depend on the stance of the opposition parties as to whether they really try to go after the government instead of, in my opinion, really taking it on board and making this a collective effort.
On that note, that's going to do it for our program, but I want to give a big thanks to Alex Apostolidis, Fiona Mullen, and all of our guests in the Google Hangout. Thank you so much for contributing to today's program. Now, tomorrow's show, it used to be that people would go to the U.S. and to Europe in search of a better life, but a new trend has many leaving these countries for the very same reason, and they're going to places you might not expect. So between now and tomorrow, we'll see you online.